Hi. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to how we might use the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory as a help in developing our spiritual lives. I want to underline a few things. First of all, this is a tool that we can use for our own development. I would never ever suggest that any assessment tool, whether it's the Enneagram or Theological Worlds or MBTI, be used to typecast or pigeonhole or predict what somebody will do, how they will feel, and so on and so forth. That's not a useful employment of these instruments. And when they are used, for example, in hiring processes, I think they are very much misused. That being said, if you've done any of these, you may have found them helpful. They may reveal some things about yourself, about your preferences, about things that attract you more than others in the world. And that's what we're using MBTI for in this particular module. It's to help us make connections in terms of our spiritual practices, our spiritual activities, and with some folk in the past who may resonate with us more than others. It's a tool. Okay? In the Brightspace module, you will find an abbreviated version of the MBTI questionnaire. If you don't know your 4 letters for the MBTI, please stop the video now and complete that inventory. That inventory is not the complete version. It's not the licensed version for which one requires special training and so on. It is, however, available on the internet, and it's sufficient for the purposes that we need it for in this process. So, if you would please, as I said, stop now and either find the letters that you already know or work your way through the inventory and then return. Welcome back. I presume you now have your 4 Myers-Briggs Type Inventory letters in front of you. If this was your first time doing the inventory or your first time in a while, I hope you found it a useful bit of work. There's lots of material on the internet about the MBTI in various aspects of our lives. You also need to know that there are some considerable scientific concerns about the validity of the whole inventory. So please remember my caution that we are using this as a self-advisory rather than a predictive thing. And always in MBTI work, you are the best judge of whether something is correct or not. If something doesn't feel right, then go with your gut. As we apply the insights of the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory to our spiritual lives, there are some basics of spiritual conversation, spiritual theology that we need to come to terms with. The first thing is that Christian writers have often spoken of the ends or the results that we seek in prayer. And that allows us to divide prayers into speculative prayers and affective prayers. Speculative prayers are about the illumination of the mind. The person praying wants to know the will of God in a particular setting. In affective prayer, we're seeking to illuminate our heart, to involve our emotions, to draw closer to feeling the love of God. So think about your prayer and your prayer life. If you were to think about what you are seeking when you pray, what's the common end that you seek? We all move back and forth, so none of this is meant to fix you in time or place. But what does it tell you about yourself? The next major category of understanding prayer in terms of Christian spiritual theology is the means of prayer. And here we have two forms as well. They come from the Greek words apophatic and cataphatic. Apophatic and cataphatic. Apophatic refers to the emptying of the senses, sometimes called a via negativa in Latin. It's direct seeing. And the theological foundation of apophatic prayer is that we can know nothing about God that is not revealed to us. Cataphatic prayer, on the other hand, uses images and senses. It's the via positiva in Latin. It's indirect seeing because it works on the conviction that we come to know God through contemplating God's creation, and that could be the natural world, it could be art, music, people, all sorts of things, but we are more moved to connection with the divine by looking at things in the world and marveling at the gifts that God gives to us. Apophatic prayer is more like centering prayer that some of you might be familiar with, where we seek to move aside in our mind and soul all of the things that might distract us from connection with the divine and use that space as the place in which God speaks to us. So we have speculative prayer or affective prayer, which seeks the illumination of the mind or the illumination of the heart. And we have apophatic and cataphatic prayer as the means. And that brings us to this grid. Speculative prayer and affective prayer balance between apophatic and cataphatic images. Connecting this to Myers-Briggs, then, you can see in this slide how the quadrants line up with 2 letters in each inventory profile. So if we start with the top left, NT, intuitive thinking person, prefers to receive information from the world through their imagination and evaluates it through thinking, learns best through experimentation, learns through doing, likes to do projects. If you identify as an NT, does that sound like you? Moving to the right, to the ST, sensing, thinking, this person prefers to receive information through the senses and evaluates through thinking. Their preferred mode of learning is through lectures and books by an expert. And they're really looking for what is true and how it is applied in our world. The intuitive feeling person, the bottom left quadrant of the diagram, prefers to receive information from the world through imagination and evaluates it through thinking. Okay, so that's the intuitive part. Learns best through personal observation and replication. That's the feeling part. They like a role model. They're the sort of person who likes to see what somebody else is doing, learn the steps, and learn by repeating those steps. And finally, in the bottom right corner of the quadrant, the sensing feeling person, the SF, prefers to receive information from the world through the senses and evaluates it through inner sense of rightness. They have a gut sense of right and wrong. They learn best through concrete experience, and they like a loving and affirming teacher. They are doers. So take a moment and think about those and ask yourself, is this still ringing true? Does this sound like me? If we move a step further and we think of our prayer style, for the NT, the upper left corner of the quadrant, prayer style tends to be conversation with God. Spirituality is sometimes found in living and working with the needy, and the needy is in air quotes because there are many types of needs. The aim is often somehow to change society or a portion of society through witness and action. Moving to the right, for the ST, the prayer style is one of working things out in the mind that leads to action. So they might think of the Jesuit examination of conscience or a silent retreat. For these folks, they want to work best and their spirituality is most fully expressed if they're working in a system to create change, leading to more justice and equity and faithfulness. The bottom left quadrant of our grid, the NF, the prayer style, well, intuition is dominant. They want to feel union with God. The Jesus prayer, which is said to the in and out of our breath, is often common for them as they attempt to clear their mind. They like solo retreats. In their spiritual life, they often want to live a contemplative life, whether that contemplative life is in a community or in society, but with specific and often significantly lengthy periods of time spent in meditation and prayer. They want to live a contemplative life, which brings them into a fuller awareness of the kingdom's presence here and now. And then, again, the SF folk. Their preferred prayer style, emotions are dominant. They engage in meditation to get a sense of God's presence with them. The way of the cross or the rosary, often tools and techniques to bring them into closer contact with that sense of presence. They live out their spirituality most effectively and most happily in a community and engaging in acts showing that God is in fact active in our world. So again, pause and contemplate those quadrants. Is that sounding like you? What sorts of examples from your experience fit or don't fit with what's being said here? And remember that these are dominant preferences. They are not boxes into which we are fit. And human beings vary widely across the spectrum in their own lives. And so just because I may identify with one particular quadrant doesn't mean that my spiritual life is lived entirely in that place. I have access to the other quadrants, but my preferred place is usually one of the four. Let's think a little bit more about how this inventory results affect our spiritual life. Top left-hand corner, the intuitive thinker likes worship to be relevant. You feel you've really worshiped when the service has some connection to the world as you understand it. And so if you were going to be looking for figures from the past or contemporary writers, you might consider St. Francis of Assisi, Catherine of Genoa, John Calvin, Meister Eckhart, Dorothy Day, Matthew Fox, Diana Butler Bass, Nadia Bolz Weber. Those are the people who you are most likely to resonate with. And you ask about the historic figures, how do we know? It's not based, of course, on them having taken the inventory. It's based on what they have done, the results, their writings, and tying them back into things that are revealed through the inventory. So those are places where you might find some place of connection. The ST likes quality sermons and opportunity for reflection and study. And so you might consider Martin Luther, Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN General Secretary who wrote the book Markings, Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, Augustine, more contemporary writers, Kate Bowler, and the Anglican scholar N.T. Wright. The NF likes worship to be structured with significant time for reflection and for silence. Things like Teze and the liturgy of the hours and so on often resonate with those folks. And if you're in that group, you might consider checking out Eastern Orthodox writers, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and more contemporary, the monk Thomas Merton, George Fox, the founder of the Quakers, and contemporary priest and spiritual guide Richard Rohr. The SF person likes worship to be intimate, stimulating feelings of God's nearness. They want to experience God. And so if you were looking for writers that might be more congenial for you, you might think of people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Julian of Norwich, Saint Benedict, John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, and more contemporary, Barbara Brown Taylor, the Anglican historian of spirituality, Evelyn Underhill, or the various Celtic saints. Again, there's no guarantee that you will connect with these people, but there is a possibility that this is a place where you might find more personal resonance. One of the key things about Myers-Briggs is that it reminds us that everything we do, each of the preferences that we have, has a shadow side. That what is good can be distorted. Sometimes if we take a particular trait or a preference too far, it in fact turns into its shadow, a negative experience. So take a look at this chart. While the NT likes active prayer through social action, that they pray through doing things, the shadow side is what's known as moralism, excessive concern for behavior. So spending time watching people to see whether they're doing the right thing. The ST likes mental prayer leading to insight. They want to work for change within the system. The shadow side can be rationalism. They go towards solutions because they work and they make the change. And they might be excessively concerned for right thinking. So, for example, they might find themselves unable to work with somebody who, say, is a different faith tradition. Because if we don't agree in our thinking, well, can we work together? Even on causes that call us. For the NF, the ideal place is contemplative prayer and the performing of acts which are signs of God's love. The shadow of that is something known as pietism, when we as worshippers and followers of Jesus become excessively concerned for the right emotion or the right experience. There are certain things that have to happen or else. And the or else could be about other people or it could be about our own spiritual life. The SF engages in contemplative prayer by preference, which leads to a sense of union with God. And the shadow side is quietism, spending too much time and energy getting the interior life right. So we worry about the mechanics of that life without actually making the connection with God. And we worry so much about that interior life that we don't actually act in the world. So, those are some of the aspects of the Myers Briggs type inventory as it applies to our spiritual life. And in this module, you're just being invited to use that instrument as a way of understanding spirituality. And the conviction is that if we understand the spirituality of ourselves more completely, then we will have a better handle on understanding those who might resonate differently than our chosen fashion. So I hope you enjoy it. Look around, explore those writers, and see where you make connections. Thanks.